So if the story of Old English is the story of how the Germanic speakers on the island that we now call England sort of drifted away from their fellow Germanic speakers there on the continent of Europe, the Middle English period is about how a sudden sharp shock and input from a particular Italic or Romance language really altered the course of English as a language. So what's going on in 1066? Why is that such an important date? Well, in 1066, we have this battle for the throne of England, and there are three potential claimants. Two of them are named Harold. One of them is named William. One of them is Harold Godwinson, or Harold of England. One of them is we'll call him Harold of Norway, and then one is William the Bastard, or William the Conqueror. And essentially what happens is Harold of Norway, claiming right over the throne because he was from the Danelaw claim on England, he attacks up in the northern part of the country. At the Battle of Stamford Bridge, Harold Godwinson, his forces not only defeat them, but kill Harold of Norway, so Harold of Norway is out of the running. And then while that's happening in the south, William the Conqueror, or William the Bastard as he was called at that time, lands in the south, and they march south to fight them. And he's called William the Bastard because although he had a claim on the throne, it was through an illegitimate line. Harold Godwinson is killed. Harold Godwinson is killed in that battle, the Battle of Hastings, and because of that, that leaves William the Bastard as the only claimant, and of course, from that point on, we call him William the Conqueror. So why does this battle matter linguistically? It matters because, of course, William the Conqueror and the people he brought over with him were Norman French, and so they spoke a language that was also Indo-European, but was from a very different branch, the Italic or Romance branch. And because of, and normally when you have a small number of immigrants who speak one language and 99% of the rest speak another language, they are, the minority language is going to be swamped. However, in this case, it was the ruling class who spoke Norman French and everybody else who spoke English. And so because of that, it doesn't change what the language is. English still really does remain the language, the conventional language of that community. But because every powerful institution is actually speaking French, it creates very, very sharp and sudden changes in English as a language. And again, I want to caution you that those changes that it creates are, although I call them sudden, they're sudden from a linguistic point of view. We still have a situation where everyone understands their grandparents and believes their grandparents speak the same language that they speak, and everyone understands their grandchildren and believes their grandchildren speak the same language they speak, even though the language is changing really rapidly. And so when you look at the sort of key events that are listed in your book and the ones that you really need to know before you come into the exam, you see 1066 sort of begins this, and from that point on, every important event is a severing of that relationship with France. 1204, King John losing Normandy from France. And note that in 1258, we've got Henry III issuing the first English language proclamation since 1066. So think about that. We are talking really 2 centuries where every official royal proclamation in England is in French. And you can sort of see how those centuries really had a serious impact on the language itself. And so you begin sort of these different moments where, as time goes on, the relationship between the English and the French are being more and more severed. So why is the Black Death sitting here? What happens with the Black Death, 1348 to 1350? Why does that matter linguistically? Well, it matters for this reason. the Black Death kills about a third of the people in Europe. And one of the economic side effects of that is that suddenly there's a labor shortage, and peasants who really had not been able to, they had to accept whatever the market was. Suddenly their labor, if you happen to be a surviving peasant, your labor is now in demand, and you can demand a lot more money, you can demand a lot more respect than you could before that. And so you'll notice that the next half century from that point on, after the Black Death, there's a sudden rise and sudden changes in what happens with the peasants. So because of this, of course, the peasants, they don't speak French at all. And of course, in this time, the French of the ruling class is getting worse and worse and worse because their relationship to France is much more strained, through multiple wars and other things. So in 1362, we get the Statute of Pleadings requiring that all court proceedings be conducted in English. Think about that. For 300 years, if you are a peasant in England, the court proceedings that you're going to hear are not going to be in a language that you speak. And so we see these sorts of things. In 1381, we see the Peasants Revolt. Now that revolt's put down, but it just shows you the sort of the influence of the peasants. And the response of this, of Wat Tyler's Peasant Revolt, is essentially a lot of reforms that happen. And because of this, we see English again rising as a language. And this generation, of which Geoffrey Chaucer is a member, this immediately post-Black Death generation, this is where you see these writers beginning to really produce literature in English. And so English really becomes, at the end of this time, once again, the dominant language in England. Now, it's always been the dominant language in that it was the dominant language that everyone spoke. Most people spoke. However, it was not the language of the dominating class. This begins to change. At the end of the Middle English period, we get two important events that are happening. One is William Caxton bringing the printing press to England. This means that literacy really rises. People can now, get a kind of education that they couldn't. And so because of literacy after this time begins to affect a little bit, as you'll see when we study modern English, begins to affect the way that people treat the sounds of language. And then, of course, in 1492, Columbus discovers America. And in 1497, John Cabot sails to Nova Scotia in Canada. And this sort of is the beginning of a really big change for English as a language that's going to happen in the modern English period. So essentially, the Middle English, the history of Middle English is first complete domination by French and a slow degradation of that domination until finally the Black Death sort of brings a rise to the peasant class and the middle class, and really reinstalls English as the ruling class language once again in England. Now, as you're looking at the workbook, I want you to really focus once again on issues of transcription, understanding the sounds of Middle English. And one thing I'd like you to note is a really big change, among other things, is now we have, one of the things that happens is you'll notice that fricatives now have voiced and voiceless fricatives. So although those things existed, they didn't exist as something that a speaker would distinguish between. Now that distinction has become important again by the end of the Middle English period.